Redlining, a term that carries the weight of generations of systemic racism and economic oppression. Redlining refers to the discriminatory practice where services, such as banking, insurance, and access to jobs, are denied to residents of certain areas based on their race or ethnicity. This practice has had long-lasting effects on communities, particularly African American neighborhoods. It began in the 1930s, during the New Deal era. The government sought to revive the economy through various programs, including housing initiatives. However, these initiatives were not equally beneficial to all Americans. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, aimed to make homeownership accessible, but partnered with private lenders who graded neighborhoods based on perceived stability. These grades were heavily influenced by racial composition, with predominantly black neighborhoods receiving the lowest ratings. Predominantly black neighborhoods received the lowest ratings and were outlined in red on maps, signaling high risk for investment. This redlining effectively cut off these communities from essential financial services and opportunities for economic growth. This practice denied black families the same homeownership opportunities as their white counterparts. While white families were able to build wealth through property ownership, black families were systematically excluded from these benefits. It led to disinvestment and decline in black neighborhoods, perpetuating cycles of poverty. The lack of investment resulted in deteriorating infrastructure, poor schools, and limited job opportunities, further entrenching economic disparities. The legacy of redlining is a stark reminder of how policies can have devastating consequences when implemented through a lens of racial bias. Even today, the effects of redlining can be seen in the persistent economic and social inequalities that plague many urban areas. Understanding this history is crucial in addressing and dismantling the systemic barriers that continue to affect marginalized communities. Imagine being denied a loan, not because of your financial history or your ability to repay, but solely because of the color of your skin. This was a harsh reality for many African Americans who faced systemic racism in financial services. The neighborhoods they lived in were often marked as undesirable, leading to widespread disinvestment. Redlining, a discriminatory practice, systematically denied black families access to mortgages and home ownership. Without access to conventional loans, many were forced into predatory lending agreements with exploitative terms and high interest rates. These predatory loans trapped families in cycles of debt, making it nearly impossible to build wealth or improve their living conditions. As a result, housing conditions deteriorated, schools became underfunded, and infrastructure crumbled in black communities. Businesses in these areas struggled to survive, further limiting economic opportunities and growth for residents. The psychological toll of these injustices was immense, fueling anger and frustration that contributed to the civil rights movement. Redlining was not just about housing. It was a tool of racial segregation and economic oppression, locking black families into cycles of poverty. The legacy of redlining continues to shape black communities today, perpetuating systemic inequalities and economic disparities that are still felt. Urban renewal brought a new threat: gentrification. Gentrification often targets areas previously deemed undesirable, the same neighborhoods affected by redlining. As cities evolve, these areas become attractive to developers and affluent newcomers. Rising property values and taxes force longtime residents out of their homes. The displacement represents a loss of cultural identity and social cohesion. Black-owned businesses are replaced, erasing the neighborhood's unique character. Gentrification continues the systemic forces that have long marginalized black communities. Redlining and gentrification have profoundly impacted the racial wealth gap. Home ownership, a primary source of wealth creation, was systematically denied to black families. This historical disadvantage continues today. As black families often lack intergenerational wealth, gentrification drives up property values, displacing longtime residents and eroding accumulated wealth. The racial wealth gap reflects systemic barriers and historical injustices. Addressing this disparity requires acknowledging the long-lasting consequences of redlining and gentrification. Implementing policies that promote equitable access to wealth-building opportunities is essential. The cycle of poverty: how redlining continues to impact black communities today. Though outlawed, redlining's legacy perpetuates a cycle of poverty in black communities. Disinvestment and lack of resources create ongoing challenges. Underfunded schools, limited healthcare access, and job scarcity contribute to generational poverty. Increased crime rates further reinforce negative perceptions, deterring investment. Historical experiences of discrimination foster distrust between Black communities and institutions. The ongoing impact of redlining underscores the need for targeted investments and policy solutions. Addressing root causes of poverty is crucial for creating a more equitable society. Breaking the chain's policy solutions to combat redlining and gentrification. Redlining and gentrification have long been issues that plague urban communities, creating barriers to equitable housing and economic opportunities. Addressing these challenges requires a comprehensive set of policy solutions that tackle the root causes and provide sustainable pathways for community growth and stability. Dismantling redlining and gentrification requires a multifaceted approach. This includes not only revising existing housing policies, but also ensuring that new policies are inclusive and equitable. Community involvement is key, as local leaders and residents must have a voice in the decision-making process to ensure that their needs and concerns are addressed. Strengthening fair lending laws and enforcement mechanisms is crucial. Banks and financial institutions must be held accountable to prevent discriminatory practices. This includes regular audits and transparency in lending practices to ensure that all community members have fair access to financial resources. Expanding access to affordable mortgage products and financial literacy education is essential. By providing resources and education, we empower individuals to make informed financial decisions, which can lead to greater economic stability and homeownership opportunities for historically marginalized communities. Targeted investments in infrastructure, education, and job training are needed. These investments not only improve the quality of life in urban areas, but also create job opportunities and foster economic growth. By focusing on these areas, we can build stronger, more resilient communities. Policies to mitigate gentrification include rent control, property tax relief, and community-owned development projects. These measures help to ensure that long-term residents are not displaced by rising costs, and that they can continue to live and thrive in their communities. A sustained commitment to dismantling systemic racism is necessary. This involves not only addressing overt discriminatory practices, but also tackling the underlying systemic issues that perpetuate inequality. Continuous efforts and vigilance are required to create lasting change. Enacting meaningful policy solutions can create a more just and equitable society. When policymakers, community leaders, and residents work together, we can develop and implement strategies that promote fairness and inclusivity in housing and economic opportunities. All communities should have the opportunity to thrive. By addressing the issues of redlining and gentrification through comprehensive policy solutions, we can ensure that every community has the chance to grow, prosper, and achieve a better quality of life. Community empowerment grassroots efforts to preserve Black neighborhoods. Grassroots organizations and activists combat gentrification and preserve cultural heritage. Tenant unions fight for rent control and affordable housing. Community land trusts ensure long-term affordability. Economic opportunities within Black communities foster entrepreneurship and support Black-owned businesses. Art and cultural expression preserve the identity and heritage of Black neighborhoods. Murals, music, and storytelling resist displacement and celebrate history. The fight against displacement protects the soul of Black communities. A call to action: recognizing and addressing systemic racism. Redlining and gentrification are symptoms of systemic racism. Dismantling these structures requires a fundamental shift in understanding history. Education must confront the legacy of slavery, segregation, and discrimination. Teaching accurate history includes the impacts of redlining and gentrification. Holding elected officials accountable for promoting racial equity is essential. Supporting legislation that addresses housing discrimination and invests in underserved communities is crucial. Challenging racism in daily life and amplifying marginalized voices is necessary. Working together can create a more just and equitable society. Towards a more equitable future. Hope for change and a just society. The fight for housing justice requires sustained action and belief in a more equitable future. The resilience of communities and dedication of activists offer hope. Confronting the history of redlining allows us to chart a new course. The fight for housing justice is about creating thriving communities and generational wealth. Working together and listening to impacted voices can create a future free from systemic racism. The journey is long, but the destination is worth fighting for.